Have Ontario home prices finally hit the bottom? Maybe we're getting close, but I don't think we've seen enough evidence to say the bottom has arrived. And here's what I want to show you. I'm going to give you three numbers that I think tell us a lot about where the Ontario market is actually headed. And one of them might surprise you, so let's get into it. Number one is sales. Here's the good news. In June 2026, 18,051 homes sold across all of Ontario. Now that's up 5.5% from June of last year. And it was also the strongest monthly sales total since May 2024. So, is the market recovering? Put your brakes on. Just slightly maybe, but here's the problem. Sales were still 12.3% below the 10-year average. So we're improving, but we're not back to normal. And I don't anticipate it will be until late 2027 and likely moving into 2028. But the distinction of normal is crucial. Our new normal won't see home prices as they were in 2021 or 2022. The market is finding a needed correction of sorts, and that distinction is really important. But here's something else that you need to know. Ontario is not just one real estate market. I know we hear headlines like Ontario home prices are down, but that doesn't necessarily tell you what's happening in your neighborhood. Toronto is very different from Ottawa, and Ottawa is different from Hamilton. And even here, Collingwood's different from the Blue Mountains, even within the same community. A condo, a townhouse, a detached home, or a luxury property can all be experiencing very different market conditions. So don't make a decision based on an Ontario headline. Your local market matters. And that's going to become even more important as we look at the next two numbers. Number two is prices. In June, the benchmark home price in Ontario was about $753,000, and that's down 4.6% from the same time last year. But here's where it gets interesting. Different types of homes are behaving very differently. Single-family detached homes were down about 4.2%, townhouses were down approximately 7%, and condos were down just about 8%. I honestly feel like that number could be a little bit higher. Condo owners are taking a huge hit right now. So if you're a condo owner, listen, your market may look very different from someone who's selling, say, a detached home. And this is exactly why I don't like blanket statements about Ontario real estate market. One number doesn't tell the whole story. Number three, inventory. This is the number I'm watching very closely. Inventory simply means how many homes are available for sale on the market. And at the end of June, Ontario had just shy of 76,000 active listings. So that's actually 5.1% lower than a year ago. And that is encouraging, but not so fast. We're still well above normal in terms of active listings. We're 23% above the 5-year average and a staggering 41.6% above the 10-year average. Ontario had about 4.2 months of inventory. The long-term average is about 2.7 months. And this tells us something pretty important. Buyers still have choices. They don't have to panic. They can and they are taking their time and they can negotiate. And sellers have to compete for the buyer. That's very different than what we saw during the pandemic. So what about interest rates? The Bank of Canada's overnight rate is currently 2.25%, and that's much lower than the peak of the rate cycle. So you might think, oh great, rates are lower, buyers should be flooding back into the market. But they haven't, and here's why. People just don't need affordable mortgages. They need confidence. Confidence in their job, confidence in their income, and confidence in the economy. And right now, a lot of buyers, they're just still so cautious. And there's another factor. We also have economic uncertainty, trade tensions, inflation concerns, global instability, and all of these things can affect consumer confidence. And if inflation stays higher for longer, interest rates may not come down as quickly as people hope. If people are worried about their jobs or income, they're much less likely to make one of the biggest financial commitments of their lives. And this is another reason that I'm not prepared to say the bottom has definitely arrived. So what does CMHC expect? This is where I think the story gets really interesting. CMHC expects economic growth and incomes to improve in 2027 and 2028. And as that happens, buyer confidence should gradually improve That should help housing demand recover, but it's expected to be gradual, not a sudden return to the pandemic market. And Ontario is expected to continue dealing with affordability challenges and slower population growth. So even when the Canadian housing market starts to recover, your local market may recover at a completely different speed. So, have we hit the bottom? Here's my honest answer. I don't think we have enough evidence yet to say yes. CMHC is still expecting Ontario home prices to decline in 2026 before beginning to recover in 2027. Sales are improving, but they're still below long-term averages. Inventory is still elevated and buyers remain cautious. And if the economy and income strengthen, buyer confidence should gradually improve. So where does that leave us? Somewhere in the middle. We're not back to the crazy pandemic, but we're not in a strong recovery either. We're in a market that's still trying to find its balance. Here's what I've learned in almost 30 years of real estate. Nobody rings the bell at the bottom. Nobody sends you an email saying, congratulations, today was the lowest price you're going to see. That's not how real estate works. The bottom is usually a period of time, not one particular day. Sales start improving, inventory starts coming down, buyers become more confident, and sellers become more realistic. And eventually, prices stop falling and begin to recover. And here's the problem. By the time everyone agrees that we've reached the bottom, you may already be looking at a recovering market. If you're a buyer, I wouldn't spend too much time trying to predict the exact bottom. Instead, ask yourself 4 questions. Is the home fairly priced? Can I afford it comfortably? Am I planning to stay there for several years? And most importantly, am I getting good value for my money? Those questions may be far more important than trying to predict whether prices will be another 2 or 3% lower in 6 months from now. And if you're a seller, this is not a market where you can simply pick a price because that's what your neighbor got 2 years ago. Today's buyer is looking at today's market. Pricing correctly from the beginning is extremely important, and this is why local data matters. If you're buying or selling in Collingwood, the Blue Mountains, Thornbury, or anywhere here across Southern Georgian Bay, our market can look very different. So I always recommend looking at 3 things: your specific community, your type of property, and your price range. Those 3 things can tell you far more than a headline. Final thought, have Ontario home prices hit rock bottom? I don't think we can say that yet, but I do think the numbers are telling us something very important. We may be getting closer to a turning point. You don't need to perfectly predict the bottom to make a good real estate decision. You need to understand what's happening in your market, your neighborhood, and your price range. I'm Kimberly Diamond with the Georgian Realty Team. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I wish you a blessed day.